Good evening, good afternoon, good morning to everybody from wherever in the world you are joining us. Welcome to another in our series of the University Guys webinars. My name is David Hawkins. I am the founder and the director of the University Guys. It's my great pleasure to be speaking with you tonight. You do not have the benefit of any other guests for tonight's webinars, as in the previous in our series, but hopefully over the course of this time, I'm able to give you some insight into tonight's topic, which is building a US college list for successful applications. If you have come new to the University Guys and our series of webinars and have missed our previous topics on things such as a cost-effective North American education, what is holistic admissions for the United States, or beyond the bright lights with UK admissions, please do go to our Facebook page at the University Guys, and you can look on there in the video section and see recordings of those previous webinars, indeed other live events we have done over on our Instagram channel. We at the University Guys are a small team of accredited or affiliated college counsellors working with different elements of expertise. We do not promise to have some secret sauce to wave a magic wand and turn students into something else, but we help students apply to global universities, which can be quite a stressful situation, and we like to work with students and indeed, if possible, with their school-based counsellors to try to reduce stress so we can make this process understandable, enjoyable and successful. My name is David. I am the director of the company, and I am very privileged to hold memberships as an affiliated consultant to the Council of International Schools, a supporting member of the Council of British International Schools, I'm a long-standing and former committee member for the International Association for College Admissions Counselling, and a professional member of the US-based Independent Educational Consultants Association. And my contact details are on the screen there, and do feel free to follow along on social media or get in touch if you would like some more information about us. I'll also put some contact details at the end. It's our great pleasure to work with a large number of students as part of the team of people advising them. And our students who we are working with are applying to a range of universities all over the world, from some of the most selective universities in the world, for example, Stanford here, which most commonly will admit 1 out of every 30 students who apply. And this was a student we worked with this year who managed to get an offer, and we were very happy to work with Philip and delighted with his success. But we also support students applying to destinations all over the world. These are the 111 different universities across 9 different countries that our students in the class of 2020 were lucky enough and fortunate enough and worked hard enough to gain these universities offers. And it's been our great privilege to work with these students. Not only those maybe applying to some of the world famous name brand universities, but every single one of these is an individual success for that student and finding something for them that is going to be meaningful and fulfilling for the next phase of their education. In any topic about US admissions going on right now, it would be remiss of anyone not to touch on one important bit of information. For those of you who may not be intimately plugged into the nuances of US higher education, you may not be aware that in the COVID-19 situation we all face, a huge number of US universities have made it optional for students to submit SAT or ACT tests as part of their standard application requirements. You'll notice down in the corner here, the ones in bold of universities that have dropped these requirements most recently, and these would be requirements for international students. There are many colleges on here that were already test optional for international students for many years. And you'll notice just on the most recent ones will include some of these most selective US universities such as Columbia, Penn, Dartmouth and the University of Virginia. However, that is not really the focus of what I'm talking to you about tonight. The focus is on the college list rather than standardized testing. And I really want to hammer home a few key points as we go through this evening's webinar on the importance of having a coherent college list. As I mentioned, we at the University Guys work with students applying to all sorts of different countries. And the United States is the most complicated admissions process of all those that we advise on. And a lot of that is because there are an awful lot of unknown unknowns for those who may not be intimately familiar with this process. Knowing that you don't know something is okay because you know you need to find out about it, but not knowing that you don't know something can be really problematic. And what we have found over many years of doing this, and for me in my career, both in schools and now as an independent advisor, is that an awful lot of students will apply to US universities without understanding the nuance between the experiences that they are actually applying for. And that is where, unfortunately, disappointment can come when students are a bit mystified, where decisions come out in just before Christmas for the early round or in the spring for the regular round. Think, well, I have the grades and I did everything right. What did I get wrong? Well, that's when I'll pose this question. What's wrong with this college list? We have 3 name brand universities, world-class universities such as Brown, University of California, Berkeley, and the University of Pennsylvania. These are all universities which are very highly ranked on whatever world ranking, if you believe the rankings are of any value. We have some skepticism about them, but they do appear on these world lists. Within the United States, on the US News and World Report rankings, they are similarly highly ranked. You see our skepticism here about rankings when you see that Brown is ranked 53rd in the world and Berkeley is 13th, but in US News and World Reports, they are on the other way round. These are universities which are looking for students when testing is something that can be used with very high grades. They have a middle 50 of ACTs that are all sort of in the similar kind of range. Their SAT scores are very similar. So these are all highly ranked universities looking for academic students. Their admissions rates are very, very high, 8% at the University of Pennsylvania and Brown, and 15% at Cal Berkeley. Though the student bodies, we start to see a little bit of difference. We've got what we would call sort of mid to small size at Penn and Brown, and a large size university in the University of California, Berkeley. But again, perhaps not something that's going to be making students think, these are very different universities. But this is where we start to see some of the differences. At Brown, we are only able as an undergraduate applicants to apply to the college. We are applying to the undergraduate bit of Brown University. But at Cal Berkeley, students have choices. It's a question I pose to students from time to time is, well, if you want Berkeley, which bit of Berkeley? And quite often I get a blank face coming back to me and say, okay, well, there's maybe a little bit more you need to know. Because student applying to Cal Berkeley can apply to the College of Arts and Sciences, College of Engineering, College of Environmental Design, the College of Natural Resources, College of Business. Indeed, there is also quirkily a College of Chemistry. Whereas the University of Pennsylvania, we have a similar situation with different parts and different programs at Penn we can apply to. CAS, which is the College of Arts and Sciences, Wharton being the business school, nursing school, or their engineering school. So we see some differences there of, well, what am I applying for? But this is where we really start to see the difference here in what's wrong with this college list, in that actually the academic curriculum being delivered to students at Brown is an open curriculum. And I'll give a little bit more detail about that. Whereas the academic curriculum, depending on the college at Cal Berkeley, can be quite strict. It has some general education requirements of the classes that students will have to take. Whereas University of Pennsylvania would be in the middle, where it has a core curriculum that everybody will have to take, but there is significant flexibility inherent in that core. So there is a level of nuance here in terms of the academic fit, and you'll hear me use that word fit quite a bit, that students need to understand. This is not like applying to Manchester or Liverpool or Sheffield in the UK, where in effect you're getting a relatively vanilla curricular experience across the 3 of them. There is some significant nuance here. And a student who might just apply to these 3 universities looking at maybe the first 4 points here, but missing these other points about actually what am I applying to be taught, will really find that they could end up making their applications not work as well as they possibly could do. And so to make this point really clear, it is, in my opinion and the opinion of my colleagues, that too many students apply to US universities without knowing what they are applying for. The Golden Gate Bridge is a really interesting metaphor here. What is beneath that fog? What do we know we are driving into here? What actually is behind this curtain of what US universities are looking for when they are choosing who to admit to their institutions? Well, this idea of fit really does matter. Yes, universities are looking for students who are good enough to do the degree, and depending on the selectivity of the university, they will have a sense of how they work out a student is smart enough to succeed at their university. They will look at achievement in high school, normally 4 years of educational history. If students are doing external exams, be that APs, the IB diploma, BTECs, A-levels or pre-U, they will look for that as well. But they are also looking to see whether they can imagine that student succeeding, not generally, but fitting into their community. And their community is an academic one with a curriculum bespoke to that university that is being delivered to its students. But it also is a cultural community. Some universities are in major cities, some are in small towns, some are in very rural communities. Some pride themselves on service, some are highly competitive. Lots of universities have different types of communities that they have built, they curate, and students need to be able to fit into those. This also matters when we are looking at these hyper-selective universities like Columbia that you see the picture of here, where everybody who is applying to these universities has stellar grades and very strong profiles. So what else do you have? What is that extra hook that might yank you into that university? It may be an athletic hook, that you might be someone who is also being recruited to maybe run for the university, to play basketball for the university. You might have a really interesting academic interest that is going to be quite different, and the university might want to do that. You might come from a country, from a demographic group that university struggles to recruit from. It could be legacy, where you have significant family connections into that. But having a hook, again, can make a difference at this level of selectivity. And it matters particularly because when we're applying to the United States, for many, many universities, you will not just be applying with a general essay that goes to all the universities. You will be making supplemental applications directly to universities as well. And if you don't really know what you're applying for, it's very hard to tailor your college supplement to what that university is looking for. Now, sometimes I have these conversations with prospective families to be working with over coffee, and we're talking about these kind of things. And sometimes the students, but more commonly the parents, will say, oh, we don't care about fit. The student will just cope with whatever. You know, it doesn't matter. We want that sticker. We want that name brand university for our child. And we say, well, you might not care. Now, yeah, we can understand that you just want that name, that badge of success for your child. But the admissions office will do that. They are looking to admit students who they know fit their community. They are looking to build a class, in the phrase admissions officers use, of students who are going to make a success of that university during that 4 years that they are members of the community. So yes, you might actually look at this and go, I can fit into these quite different academic experiences and these quite different communities. But if the university that is reading that application cannot, through the essay, the Common App essay, through the supplemental applications, through the activities list, and indeed from the references that school provides, get a picture of who that applicant would be on that community, in that campus, then they're not going to admit a student if they really don't think they're going to be successful. So yes, parents, yes, students, you may not think this matters, but unfortunately for you, the people who are making that decision to admit, whitelist, or deny really do. And fit actually can make a huge difference. I know not everyone joining us tonight is from the UK, but these are the statistics that I use when I'm giving workshops and talks here in the United Kingdom. And these are statistics for UK passport holders, because that's what's declared in the common data to these universities. But averaging out the numbers of British passport holders of these 4 universities over the 4 years of the US degree, you can see that the numbers that we are talking about here at these quote unquote top US universities are relatively small. So it really isn't the case of a university admissions officer might read the application and go, oh, can't really see the student here, but their grades are fantastic, we'll offer them a place. We are talking about extreme levels of selectivity in terms of admissions to these universities. And so you can see the sort of academic profile for the British curriculum, similar for those maybe in the IB, looking at say 40 or higher, and equivalents in the AP and other board curriculums. These numbers are really, really small. And so students have to, almost as taken for granted, have stellar academics. But what else have you got? And how do you fit what the university is looking for? So actually, when we're talking about this kind of idea of what the list would be, I thought, well, I've given you a list which I think doesn't work. I should put my money where my mouth is. And this is an art, not a science. So it's not as if I am standing here as the oracle telling you that these are coherent lists. But this would be a list that to someone with my experience, I think a student maybe wants to start looking at. If you are liking the idea of Brown, then maybe Amherst, Rochester, the Gallatin School at NYU, which is the School of Individualized Study, Vassar, Grinnell, and Wake Forest, which are other institutions where academically they are giving you quite a lot of flexibility, perhaps a very open curriculum, or like at Gallatin, a different kind of way in which students are given a lot of flexibility. Student looking at Penn, maybe wanting a slightly more sort of fixed or flexible core curriculum, and potentially also in a setting which is mid-size and maybe a little bit urban. You've got Princeton, the University of Virginia, Stanford and Duke would be on there. Second Princeton, probably I should put Cornell in there. And so that would be maybe a different kind of list of universities on there. However, if a student may be looking for the Wharton School at Penn, so I mentioned that at Penn they have this Wharton program for business you can apply to. Well, then if you're looking for business at Penn, you might be looking for business at other universities. So maybe at NYU, looking at the Stern School. At the University of Southern California, perhaps Marshall. Babson College, the #1 entrepreneurship program in the United States with a really interesting first-year curriculum, might be that. The direct entry program to the BBA at Ross at the University of Michigan, or a lovely university, I think not well known enough outside of the United States, Carnegie Mellon's Tepper School of Business. Now, if we're again looking for Cal Berkeley, we may be looking for big, we're looking for a state university, we're looking for something actually with quite a lot of bureaucracy behind how they have to create their curriculum. The UCs have A through G requirements and things like that into their admissions process. Maybe UCLA, University of Michigan, Notre Dame, a big, strong, maybe sporty university, UW, the University of Washington, or Cornell, which has some public elements to it, as well as being in the Ivy League. Now, I said this is not a science, and councillors joining us tonight might be able to argue with me with these. But the idea is you will see on these lists that none of these lists is all the Ivies. And if there's one thing that I have to say gives me massive warning lights in my head is when I speak to a student and I ask them, what is their plan for the United States applications? And they say, I'm applying to all the Ivies. That might be what they're saying. What I'm hearing is a student saying, I really don't know much about applying to the United States. And I'm in myself thinking this student is going to be very disappointed when they get through this process, because we need to make sure that understanding what we're looking for is very different things. So having a coherent list really matters. When students are piecing together their application, they are providing significant amounts of more information about them than they will do for almost every other university application system on the planet. The Common App essay is going to be one which is going to need to give an impression of a student. This is not an essay about how well suited you are to study chemical engineering, or a letter of motivation for why you are suited to studying business at, say, Erasmus University College in the Netherlands. This is an essay where you are explaining who you are as a person by looking back into your life and maybe talking about some stories or some anecdotes or something meaningful to you. Now, someone reading that essay is going to build a picture of you, and you want them to maybe imagine you walking through the campus, like, for example, Stanford's campus here. The coherent list is also going to make a difference to maybe the sort of things you would talk about in your activities list. Students on the Common Application are given 10 slots where they can talk about an activity that they did, how often they have done that activity, and their role within that activity. Now, what activities you might choose to emphasize, where you might put those on your activities list, can give an impression to the admissions officer. And really, really importantly, is as well as the Common App essay and everything else the students writes, for almost every US university, with some exceptions, students will be providing 2 and possibly 3 references written by teachers. Now, those references can be great, but sometimes they can also be a little bit generic about the student. And if the reference writer is only really aware, perhaps as a teacher at an international school or maybe as a British school here, of the general idea of what US universities are looking for, then they might not hit on the themes that's going to match the student to that university. And I'll give you an example. If a student is looking for a small liberal arts college education, but maybe someone like Middlebury or Bowdoin or Colby in the Northeast United States, very selective universities, they are choosing a very kind of small discussion-based life of the mind residential community. And so you would hope that the student who was fitting those kind of experiences would, during their secondary school education, have demonstrated those skills. They would be the sort of person who maybe loved debating, liked to have conversations with their peers about academic things, maybe really enjoyed speaking to their teacher before or after class about something that they'd read. So a student applying to those kind of universities, you would think that the theme of the references would try and emphasize those points. But if a student was applying to a university which actually required them to be very independent, to self-study, to be able to cope with things on their own, the student's references would probably touch on a slightly different theme. So this coherent list really matters because it enables a student, if they can look across the list of universities they're applying to and come up with 3 or 4 themes that unite those colleges, then it means that the Common App essay, the activities list, and the references will do an absolutely excellent job of explaining to the admissions officers reading that application how that student will succeed in those particular communities. So fundamental then to this process, and something that we deeply believe at the University Guys is key to succeeding with US university applications, is knowing how to choose your colleges. Very commonly, we will be speaking to students who've really delved into SAT or ACT prep, particularly if they're used to a system like here in the UK, where you need to have the grades to enter a university. They see SAT and ACT as being like entry requirements, and miss a bit that seems to come before that, that actually what you need to really understand in this process is what are you wanting to get first before you really delve into this. And so I like to pose also a few more questions to students, and when I give these talks and workshops in schools, I'll ask these 2 questions. What is the US version of the Russell Group? Now, very commonly, I'll have a brave student, put their hand up or shout out the Ivy League. And I like maybe potentially to say, well, I wish I had a buzzer and it could red lights be going off saying, no, that is the wrong answer. The Ivy League are not the 8 most selective US universities. They're not the 8 oldest. They are not the 8 best on any ranking site that you might care to look at. They are 8 universities which share some common themes, and the Ivy League is the sports competition that they are part of, whereas the Russell Group is an academic designation of research-intensive universities in the UK. The US equivalent of the Russell Group is actually the Association of American Universities, which is 63 US universities and also 2 in Canada. And so if a student is looking at Russell Group universities in the UK, they should be looking at AAU universities in the United States. And actually that idea of where the comparable numbers comes in is important with this second point, because in each year group in all US schools right now, we have somewhere between 3.5 million and 3.7 million students. So it is a vast number of students in each year group in schools across the US. And of that 3.5 to 3.7 million, about 2.5 million of those students will go through a university application procedure. That's why the United States has over 4,000 different universities or degree granting institutions, because the scale is so much bigger. So comparing things like the Russell Group with 20 or so universities with the Ivy League with only 8 is getting this scale really the wrong way around. The students need to understand that the scale is very different. And we see that in this wonderful statistic. Each year, around 250,000, 250,000 applications to the Ivy League are told, sorry, no. Now, when you bear in mind only about 350,000 Brits go to university in the UK every single year, you see how the scales are very, very different here. Saying I want to go to Harvard isn't like saying I want to go to Oxford. Saying I want to go to Harvard is like saying I want to live in this room of this college at Oxford University, because the scale is very different. Now, what that hopefully should mean is not to scare everybody off, but is to understand that actually, because of the scale of the United States, in terms of the number of students and in terms of the number of universities, there are many, many, many more good universities than just the 8 that you see. And extraordinarily high numbers of incredibly talented young men and women will apply to the top US universities every single year and not make a single Ivy League application. And that's because actually students in the United States and those in international schools and schools around the world who have been intimately familiarized with this process will understand that Ivies are not the be-all and end-all. So I'll start off with a little game of selectivity. Cornell is in the Ivy League, and you'll see in the admission cycle just gone, 11% of students who applied were admitted to Cornell, similar admissions rate to LSE and Imperial here in the United Kingdom. Now, with Swarthmore is a wonderful liberal arts college, would you think maybe it has a higher or lower admissions rate than Cornell? Well, it takes 9% of its rates, and this is sort of when I give a talk like this in a school and maybe get some quizzical looks from the audience, like, I've never heard of Swarthmore, but Cornell I have heard of. How is it harder to get into? And say, well, okay, well, Johns Hopkins, it must be even harder to get into. I've heard of Johns Hopkins. Well, actually, no. Georgetown, which has a great brand reputation and again is very well known around the world, had a 15% admissions rate. Whereas New York University is at 20% admissions rate, 20% being about the admissions rate also for Oxford and Cambridge universities in the UK, though clearly that is an artificial rate because you're not allowed to apply to both. The University of Southern California comes in at 13%, Bowdoin comes in at 10%, Duke at 9%, and the most selected university from the list here, and indeed one of the most selected universities in the United States, is the University of Chicago. Now, this list is obviously deliberately created for effect, but the effect hopefully is quite an important one to show that what you might perceive as being the hardest university to get into the United States is not necessarily the case when we look at reality here. And so when you are creating your college list, when you're looking at building coherency, you need to go into this knowing that it doesn't really matter whether I've heard of some of these universities when I start, because as I delve into this process, I will know that I'm going to be looking for a really, really strong list of universities. What I also will say, and it's something I caution the families we work with when we go into this, is that you can start to look at a 20% admit rate and think, oh yeah, that's quite okay, that's quite easy. Because if you're looking at a U Chicago at a 7%, or maybe a Harvard at a 4.8% variation around that point each year, 20% seems okay. 20% still means that 4 out of 5 people who apply don't get in. So we are still talking about significant levels of selectivity coming into this process. However, this range of excellent universities does give a lot of scope for students to delve into this. And it's a really important thing to be reassured as students and as families going into this process, that when you are building your coherent list, it's not a case necessarily of trading down. An analogy I use quite regularly with students is the idea of maybe they are going shopping for a car. And when they start to think about going to buy a car, you're going to have to come up with some criteria. You want a really good car. You want a car that's going to do everything you need to do. But are you going for a pickup? Are you going for a 4x4? Are you going for a sports car? Are you going for a nice family car? And if you really want a sports car, then maybe you'll be looking at a Porsche or a Lamborghini or Ferrari. Or maybe if you want a 4x4, maybe you're looking at for a Jeep or a Land Rover or a Range Rover. And so when I start to talk about coherency in our list, I say, well, if you were trying to decide the type of car you want, and maybe you are a person who's going to have a family, you wouldn't get a Porsche and a Mercedes and a Land Rover on that list. That wouldn't be coherent. So again, hopefully using some ideas there that make students realize why they need to work on their college list. And just to emphasize that point, to see many other universities all around the United States, which are very selective, they are desirable commodities like maybe those cars I've just mentioned, and many students are applying to them. So hopefully I've made the point now about having a coherent list, about having some of the differences involved in this process understood. So when students are thinking about this process, when they are starting out about, okay, right, David, we hear you, we know we need to think about our college list. Where do you start? Well, you start by working out what kind of university you are looking for. What is this experience the student wants to get from university in the United States? And those experiences can be very different. The three universities you see on the screen now are name brand, world-class universities. Dartmouth College, one of the Ivies in the middle, University of California, Los Angeles there with the flags, and NYU with the purple. These universities are all looking for students who are achieving very highly. All three are now test optional for the next cycle. In fact, the University of California is going to go through a very interesting phase with its testing requirements over the next 5 years. So the students are going to have succeeded well in school and will either have achieved or be predicted to achieve very well in their last year of high school. But they are very different kinds of university. Dartmouth is in the lovely little town of Hanover in upstate New Hampshire, a good 2.5, 3-hour drive, beautiful drive up from Boston, a couple of hours further to Burlington. It's surrounded by beautiful scenery, but it's a bit rural. The town of Hanover and Dartmouth College are kind of intermingled with each other, and there's not a huge amount of other things going on all the time at Hanover other than what's going on at Dartmouth. So it's a smallish community. And Dartmouth know then to succeed in their university, yes, you have to be smart, but you have to be able to cope in a smallish community. You're not going to be able to pop off to a major metropolitan area just in between class. And Dartmouth tests this, because when you apply to Dartmouth, yes, you get your council reference from school. You also have your 2 teacher references, but they recommend that you also get a reference from a friend. They are trying to see, have you got some evidence in your background of succeeding in a community? Can you have a friend write a very positive reference about what you have done in their life? Now, in contrast, the University of California, of which UCLA is one of the most famous members, does not require any information from a student's school at all. No references, no transcript, no predicted grades, apart from maybe post-application in very few circumstances. And so a student has to navigate that kind of process on their own. It is a slightly bureaucratic application. It's been updated for the most recent cycle, but still, students have to understand the different amount of terminology. Well, the University of California system is governed by the state of California. It's itself quite a complicated system. It does have relatively strict requirements to navigate it. Students actually in the University of California sometimes can struggle to do everything in the right order in order to graduate in 4 years, and quite often might take 4.5 years to graduate. So a student, therefore, in their application is having to be independent, and when they're at university, they have to be independent. Whereas NYU is in and of New York City, and indeed in and of Abu Dhabi and in and of Shanghai, where they also have degree granting campuses. So students can pop out in between class. They are going to be able to take use of the resources like the Metropolitan Museum or the cloisters or the wonderful other things that New York has to offer. So students at NYU are experiencing very different day-to-day life than a student would be at Dartmouth. So again, you can see that there is very different experiences. So when students are starting to think about building their college list for the United States, they need to not see these 3 universities, and I can keep picking 3 more examples if I had all the time in the world, where yes, the grades that students require are very similar, but the sort of fit they have to demonstrate is going to be very different. Now into this, I will also chuck the fact that we have in the United States universities and colleges. It's a term that I and many other independent counsellors and college counsellors will use interchangeably. Perhaps sometimes for fun we'll talk about such a place being a good school. But universities and colleges are actually two distinct things in the United States. And this is taken from the US News and World Report rankings, again, to be taken with a pinch of salt. But this is the rankings on the left for the universities and the rankings on the right for the colleges. The universities are universities because they have undergraduates and they have postgraduates. So a university like Princeton has its undergraduate element, but it also has a number of postgraduate schools in things like law and business and medicine, and it has professors doing research and all sorts of things like that. Whereas a college, which may not have the same worldwide cachet, is only doing the undergraduate bit. So as I showed earlier with Brown, a student applying to Brown can only apply to Brown College. If Brown College was picked up out of Providence, Rhode Island and put on its own maybe in the countryside and didn't have the other bits, the postgraduate schools, then it would be like a college, such as Williams, Amherst, and the others listed there. Now, again, as I've shown you already with Bowdoin and Swarthmore, some of these colleges are extraordinarily selective and very highly regarded. Some of you may never have heard of them, and that is also a point to touch on here. The fact that you have never heard of a university that is on the list of the top-ranked universities, top-ranked colleges, doesn't mean anything other than the fact that you haven't heard of it. In the same way as maybe if you were walking down Fifth Avenue, you wouldn't be able to expect someone to maybe name more than 5 or 6 UK universities. Someone in New York is probably not going to necessarily heard of University of Wales, Trinity St David. You wouldn't necessarily expect to know all the ins and outs of the top-ranked universities and colleges in the United States. When we're also trying to build a coherent college list, it is really important, once you've got a sense of the kind of general experience a student wants, is then to focus really on what are you going to be taught. Another question I like to pose in my talks and workshops in schools is this: what do you think you'll study if you go to MIT? And it's horrible pedagogy, horrible teaching to fish for the wrong answer, but I'm hoping that a student will say maths, physics, engineering. And again, I have to say, well, you could study a lot of that. MIT actually has one of the top business programs for undergraduates in the United States as well, and I actually think also a very good history department. But if you go to MIT, yes, you will do their Bachelor of Science degree, but this is an extract from their curriculum requirements. Anybody at MIT in the undergraduate program, whether they are studying for a degree in economics, in physics, in chemistry, biology, or indeed in business, will have to study their core. And that core is equally divided, yes, science and maths on one hand, but then also humanities, arts, and social sciences. Yes, potential engineers want to go to MIT. You are not done with English literature. You are not done with history. You are not even done with drawing. Your science maths requirement, you can see all the things in there that are required, but in order to fulfill that humanities, arts, and social science requirements, students are going to have to take one course each in those areas. That sometimes is a surprise to students, and I'm looking at the students maybe who are talking to me and saying, well, what A-levels are you doing? So I'm doing maths, further maths, physics, and chemistry. Okay. So where are you going to get the humanities or the arts reference, i.e. the non-STEM reference that MIT asks for me? And again, I get a blank look, because from the 3 references that most US universities want, MIT specifies that one of those references has to be from a non-STEM teacher. Sometimes the student will come back with and say, well, no, I'll go back, I'll get my GCSE English teacher, my GCSE geography teacher. And I go, that's great, fantastic. I'm sure they'll write you a wonderful reference. But this is a university with around a 5% admit rate. You think about that 5% admit rate, 19 out of every 20 people who apply aren't getting in. And maybe you're competing with somebody who's got maths, physics, chemistry, and philosophy in their A-level mix. Maybe their IB higher levels are global politics, maths, and physics, because that is a person maybe who's going to fit the academic experience of MIT. Now, some of you will obviously be very familiar with the difference between a UK degree, indeed a Western European degree in most cases, a US degree, but for those who not, allow me just 2 minutes to explain the difference here as to how MIT can construct their curriculum in that way. In the British model, and indeed the European model, you are going to university to study the thing that you were admitted to study. I studied history at the University of Oxford. I was admitted to study history. I was given history to study. It's like going to a restaurant and having a set menu. If I want Italian food, I will go to an Italian restaurant and surprise, surprise, I will get Italian food. Whereas going to the United States is a bit like going to a very, very crazy buffet where, depending on the university, there is a huge amount of choice on offer academically. So maybe if I hadn't gone to the University of Oxford, maybe if I'd gone to a US university, actually maybe only a third of the classes I studied, rather than being the whole yellow for the UK, only a third of those in the US would have actually have been history classes. And in that other 2/3 is where some of the complexity lies, because on average, maybe a third, middle third of a US university experience will be what the university says I have to take. So it will be perhaps a core curriculum. It will be distribution requirements, sometimes called general education requirements. And so I'm going to have to pick my buffer in a certain way, in the same way as a parent, you might say to your children, yes, you can have pizza, yes, you can have fries, but I need to see some fruit, I need to see some salad. The US university is saying, yes, children, we know what's good for you. You still do have to take some Shakespeare. You still, even at a university like Columbia, have to take a swimming class. And that final third then can be extraordinarily flexible, that universities will allow students to double major, to major and minor, to take a bunch of electives. And those electives might be something that you really would like to accent. I will say, as someone with a history degree now running a business, taking an elective in accountancy would have been a really interesting thing to have had. Perhaps I'd have wanted to pick up a new language. Perhaps I would have gone to Florida State University. I fancied taking a class in P.T. Barnum's circus tent that was left to the university. Now, because of that flexibility in there, we also see the assessment working differently. In the UK model, we study for a year, we take some exams, we pass them and move on. We study for a few more years, depending on the course. We might have a dissertation or a thesis, but at the end of that, we're going to have exams, and that's where our degree comes. In the US, you're being assessed continuously through each part of the course, semester by semester. So if I'd gone to a US university to major in history, not having applied to it, just having been admitted to the university, and took maybe perhaps a class in anthropology, and discovered, you know what, this anthropology thing really interests me. I could have decided that actually I would take more classes in anthropology and maybe fewer classes in history, and come out 4 years later with a degree in the subject that I never even thought that I would study when I went to university. Perfectly conceivable that some universities I could have gone in wanting to major in history, come out maybe 4 years later with a degree in chemistry. So that flexibility is really, really important, but the way in which those universities then are constructing this curriculum is fundamental to finding that academic fit. So I mentioned the MIT curriculum there as being one which has relatively strict requirements. What we will see here is the Brown curriculum. And I mentioned earlier how Brown has an open curriculum, and this is what their open curriculum is. Brown has no required core curriculum. Brown has no distribution requirements. So students actually have a huge amount of flexibility to shape their own education. The only requirements you'll see in the second bullet point here are that students must complete at least 30 courses in 8 semesters, and they must have a concentration, and it being an academic institution, they need to be able to prove that they can write pretty well. So a student maybe who was thinking, I'm going to go to MIT because I just want to study theoretical physics, may actually find that academically they're a better fit for Brown. And indeed, when students apply to Brown, one of the questions that normally is on Brown's application is, how will you make use of the open curriculum at Brown? So 2 world-class universities, 2 highly selective universities, but it couldn't be more different in terms of the academic experience that students are being put through. I'll also touch on the fact that we have significant nuance in this, and I'll pull out the example of engineering. Again, sometimes I meet a lot of students who are saying they want to go to the United States, they want to study engineering, and perhaps MIT or indeed qualifying Caltech are the top of their list. But even within that program, which is something that in some cases you do apply for when you apply to US universities, like for example, Georgia Tech on the photo here, they're actually sort of grouped together 4 different paths for students pursuing engineering in the United States. You could, for example, go to an undergraduate college, so Harvard College, part of the bigger university, will offer you a major in engineering. A major in engineering alongside students majoring in maybe classics or art history or biology, but with the same requirements that Harvard are going to be offering. You could, however, apply to an engineering school at a university. You saw some examples like Penn and Cal Berkeley I mentioned earlier. Columbia, as one of the Ivy Leagues, has its undergraduate college, and it has an undergraduate school of engineering. And within that undergraduate school of engineering, there's going to be a different set of requirements as to what a student is going to have to study to get that degree. You could, however, choose to go to a purely STEM college, a STEM school, like Georgia Tech here, like Caltech, like Illinois Tech, like Florida Tech, and many others, where actually the whole ethos of that university is going to be about STEM. There will not be performing arts majors, there will not be ancient history majors at that university. Or indeed, and something that I'm a huge fan of, but I don't think is particularly well known, are what we call the 3-2 pathway, where a student can spend their first 3 years in a college, so maybe, for example, Georgetown, in their undergraduate program, exploring all sorts of different academic topics, but doing a lot of maths and physics, and then applying into the final 2 years of the engineering program at a big university, say Columbia. So they are getting the best of both worlds. Columbia and a few other US universities have a huge list of undergraduate institutions that they have these relationships with. So for that student who maybe thinks they want to be an engineer, but doesn't want to commit to it at the point of application, the 3-2 is a great option. Now, again, huge complexity here because students with different academic interests are going to fit these different pathways slightly differently depending on their interests and their skills. And again, students who maybe say, I want to be an engineer in the United States, maybe scattergun applying without knowing what they're going for, are potentially also going to find that they will not be as successful as they could be in their applications. So the academic fit hopefully has come across quite well as what students should be looking for. And clearly they are going to university to study a lot of stuff, and the academic fit really should come first. Once then maybe students have identified the kind of academic experience they're looking for, they found a couple of colleges that maybe suit them, maybe they've got a pretty long list, then they need to look at this community fit. What actually then are the other parts of this experience that they're going to be looking for? And again, 3 examples here that hopefully illustrate the point. We have the library here at the University of California, San Diego. We have, I love this photo because it's the big house at the University of Michigan, 110,000 seater American football stadium, but they're also playing ice hockey on the stadium that day. And then we have Wellesley College, one of America's top-ranked women's colleges just outside Boston, with the beautiful Gothic architecture. So these are, again, very different communities. If you could find similar universities academically with very different communities. UC San Diego is part of that University of California system with its mission to the state of California. In that southern part of California in San Diego, it will be a university which has a huge number of students from the local area, many of whom may not actually be living on campus. They may be commuting into the university, and so the ethos and the feel and the community of there is going to be quite different. Now, picking the picture of the big house here at the University of Michigan is hopefully an indication of what something like school spirit plays there. It is a university where people are typically very proud to be there. They will wear their colors, they will go to the game. But it is a big community, it's a big public flagship university of the state of Michigan, and that comes with a different community. It might need to have micro communities within that bigger community where students in different colleges within there, different faculties, different residential communities will need to find their own families, their own tribes within that bigger community. Whereas Wellesley College, as I mentioned, is a women's college. It's also a smaller institution with a different kind of tradition into it, and that's going to suit, again, a different kind of student. So beyond the academic fit, which clearly is crucial here, there is a community fit that students need to understand. And I would say very strongly, a student who is really well suited to a small liberal arts college, like Wellesley or a Vassar or a Bowdoin, may actually not be someone who's particularly well suited to somewhere like the University of Michigan or the University of California, San Diego, and so many things on and on and on as well. One of the first times I was fortunate enough about 7 or 8 years ago now to go on quite an extensive US college tour, I remember after the 3rd or 4th visit being really quite surprised hearing student tour guides in the Northeast saying, I chose this university because I wanted 4 seasons. And it's not the hotel chain that they were looking for, it was the fact that students were coming from parts of the United States where they had never experienced distinctly 4 climactic seasons. And at the time I remember being a little bit taken back about this as being a way in which students might choose a university experience. But actually now, the more I think about it, the day-to-day climate that you will experience will be a very important factor. If you don't like the heat, then maybe looking at hot parts of the United States might not be for you. If you really like being on the beach, then maybe it will be. And so picking this community, as well as the academics, I think is something that really has a great deal of value to it. Now, this is quite a hard thing for students to work out. An awful lot of the questions that were submitted in advance, and thank you to everyone who did submit one, were on this kind of idea of how do we find fit, how do we look into it. It's extraordinarily complicated. I'm not here going to be selling our services or the service of other independent counsellors, because students can and do very successfully get into US universities on their own every year. So where can you start to look into it? Well, I'm a big fan of saying, well, the college supplements let you know. The questions that universities ask students every year are a really good indication into what kind of student are they looking for. Every single year, the university guys will start working with students in about September, October, who come to us because they've opened up the Common App and are absolutely terrified when they see these essays. And we have a package which is just for the last bit of the process, what we call our US Apply package. And quite often we'll be sitting down with the student and we'll be hearing them say, okay, I'm really struggling with the Columbia essays. Okay, which ones? Well, all the ones that ask me what I've read. Okay, we know where this is going. Well, what's the problem? I don't like reading. I always want to bang my head on the table right there and then and say, well, why are you applying to Columbia then? Columbia, in their first year curriculum, particularly in the college, has a lot of reading. And you can see the question they're asked there. What have you been made to read by school that you enjoyed the most? They also ask other questions about what have you read for pleasure? If you're leaving that blank, that may be an indication that you're not a good fit for Columbia. In terms of the community fit, I love this question that Williams College asked last year. Yeah, every Sunday night in a tradition called story time, students, faculty and staff gather to hear someone else relate a brief story and munch on their favourite homemade cookies. What story would you share? Now that is an interesting insight into the person who's coming, but also it tells you in that question what it's like to be at Williams. Now, some people will read that question and go, that is a community I would love to be a part of. I really like that idea. Then it might be a professor, it might be someone from the cafeteria, it might be a fellow student coming in and sharing their story. Some people will look at that and go, I cannot think of anything worse. And then a question here, and particularly again for students who might not have realised that some universities not only applying to that university, but you're applying to a particular bit of that university. This question here from the University of Pennsylvania: how will you explore your intellectual and academic interests? That's a great question, but answer this question given the specific undergraduate school to which you are applying. So someone applying for nursing will answer that very differently from someone applying to Wharton. So some really great things in there. Other areas that students can go to for fit, you may be able to see behind me, I have a green and blue book. The FISC guide is a really great resource giving all sorts of interesting little potted histories of universities. I'm also a big fan of niche.com. There are some niche for the Americans maybe joining us, which also has great student reviews. And indeed, in the research process that we work through with our students and our families, we've increasingly come to use YouTube as a great resource. On the one hand, the college's own YouTube accounts, because they are curated by the colleges and therefore you can see the kind of images and language they are using, but also wonderful things of YouTubers themselves recording their day in the life at their college. And so students maybe can very quickly look at those kind of things and find things out. I will alert you to a project that we have just initiated here at the University, guys, which is hopefully also going to help in this, and something we're calling the 90-second nuggets. And if you go right now to the universityguys.com/nuggets, you will see just a few of what we hope will be many, many more 90-second introductions recorded by universities, not just in the United States, but indeed in Canada and Europe, giving you little insights into life at that university. Now, hopefully I've given you an awful lot of information in there and good things to come up with. Though we do love to give our advice very freely, and universityguys.com has all sorts of free resources, recorded webinars up there, and our social media accounts do so as well. We do run a business and we do have to provide a livelihood to our families. And so if you'll excuse me just for a minute or two talking about how we at University Guys can help. For all global applications we support, whichever country the student is going to, we like to run through our three-step process. The first one would be to explore, where in the world do you want to apply? You might be coming to us saying you want the United States, and we will help you understand that process. We will educate you, we'll enable you to take ownership so you can make good choices. But very commonly in going through that process, we might be introducing students to the opportunity of studying in, say, Canada, or indeed the liberal arts colleges in the Netherlands, or in one great example, a student who we worked with a while ago, who's just finishing out her first year in the School of International Liberal Studies at Waseda University in Tokyo. Once we have worked out a plan, once we have helped students come up with this overall strategy for their applications, we will then give students the plan, what they need to do in order to go on to make that application. That may be test prep for SAT or ACT, it may be building up their extracurricular profile, it might be a huge amount of reading, particularly maybe looking at some of the most selective UK universities, but to enable students to have a guide of the sort of things that they would need to be doing in order to meet that plan. And then working alongside the student, their school and their family in order to make sure that as much of the application as we possibly can do can work to their advantage. A tool that we use in this, and something maybe that counsellors I know who are joining us today might want to look into, is a wonderful tool called Coursera. As a former history teacher, as a qualified teacher, I loved a good card sort activity, and Coursera is an online card sort where students can go through 130 or so different categories and decide, does my US university need to have this? Is it essential? Is it a must-have? Would it be nice if my university had that? Do I really not want my university to have that? Or am I genuinely just not bothered whether it does or it doesn't? And you can see an example of a Coursera we did with one of our students here, talking them through these categories, explaining to them what love of learning was like. What did work hard, play hard come through? What are the sort of subjects they really wanted the university to be good at? What are the other things that are coming here as well? An awful lot of students maybe will never have considered, do I want Greek life, sororities and fraternities in my university? Do I want to be one of a crowd? Or do I want it to, to have an outdoorsy feel for it? What are these other things I want to come into? And this is a good starting point and something that we really like to do with our students to get a sense of what they're looking for. Once we work through this process with the students, we really enjoy them putting together a plan. And this is an extract from what we would call the US Explore report for our students, which is a package that we offer just as a standalone, where families can come to us and say, look, we're happy with doing the work on our own. Actually, we're really good with that kind of stuff, but we would just like to get a handle for building our college list. Then we will help students get that plan by helping them build their Explore report. And this would be the end of that process, where this student who is looking for an interesting set of things you wouldn't often see in universities like Rice, Duke and Haverford together, but we can find some coherency for this particular student who has some very, very defined and unusual extracurricular interests. If I said any more, I'd be giving away potentially who the student might be for any one of his friends who might be on the call. But this is a coherent list based on those students' particular interests. And so you can see we're giving the information that hopefully will enable that student to go on and be successful in those applications. There are services that I've outlined a few times do cover all sorts of different things. We offer a global package which includes the whole world. We offer our one all-inclusive US package or the 3 standalones, Explore, Prepare and Apply. For Canada, Europe and the UK, it tends to be all-inclusive for the similar processes there because the workload involved on our end is less. And for some families who may wish to just use a pay-as-you-go, we can, on request, offer an hourly rate. If you do look to follow on, and you will see that the link was posted into the chat at the start, as well as some handouts, including these slides, and indeed our marketing brochure, which includes details not only about me and my background, but also of my colleagues at the University Guys. But if you'd like to book a free consultation, please do follow what was there at universityguys.com/initial meeting. The resources I mentioned online are there. They are manifold. There's lots of things up there. But if you've not come across our podcast, the University Guide podcast, I would definitely recommend that because I talked about engineering earlier. I'm highlighting episode 38. Episode 55, I think it was, went live this morning, looking at bespoke curriculum in the United States, available on Spotify and Apple and Google and all sorts of podcast apps as well. And if you do want to follow up directly, we have some information there as well. Now I have a chunk of questions come in, which I will now spend a few minutes going through, but I will also open up the questions pane on the GoToWebinar platform. If you haven't spotted that yet and you would like to type a question in, I will try and get to those in the period of time that we have left, which is about 50 minutes or so. So the questions that were submitted in advance cover a number of different topics. Hopefully some of them I've covered already in terms of the nuance and the difference between universities. There were a couple of questions of how do I know the difference between this university and this university? You know, what is the difference between what Harvard and Brown look for in applications? So I definitely think it's really, really important then for students to maybe use some of the terms I've talked about today about core curriculum, distribution requirements, general education requirements. So I would encourage students to look at those terms, to Google those terms, to delve into those kind of details. I mentioned looking at the YouTube channels. Universities have great social media presences, things like Instagram and Facebook. Even I was on a presentation with the university on Tuesday. The Foothill and De Anza community colleges now have their own TikTok channel. So that might be an interesting way to get a sense of what would the culture of that university be like. But definitely as a starting point, I would look for the core curriculum and general education requirements, possibly even look for the mission statement of the university. So anything you're looking into those kind of things as well. What I will also mention on that hyper-selective university like a Harvard or a Brown is that this is also going to come down to what does the university want? What are their institutional priorities? Now, their institutional priorities will be to have a rounded class, people from all different parts of the world, people offering all different kinds of subjects. You know, the university has professors teaching all different kinds of things. They need to have potential classicists in the same way as they need to have potential mathematicians. They also have orchestras and sports teams and other clubs and things. And so maybe one year playing the bassoon would be an advantage because the orchestra is short of a bassoonist, whereas the next year it might be something else. At the Ivy League universities, athletic recruitment into those processes is also a very significant hook. And though there are not sports scholarships at the Ivy League universities, they do have an athletic recruiting process. And sometimes it also could be things like legacy, the connections your family might have to the university. It might be the fact that your father used to be president of the United States. That thing can help. And indeed, I'm afraid at some US universities as well, the amount of money that the family may have donated over the years can potentially be a factor as well. It must be a quite odd experience to turn up at a university you're admitted to find out that the brand new building you have in your classes in is named after your parents. But that, unfortunately, sometimes is part of the process. Now, on the topic of parents, we had a number of counsellors submit those questions as well. It may be the parents who are coming into this process. They are the ones driving this name brand obsession. They are maybe focusing on the Ivy League. And I would say that is a challenge I am still fighting. And for those of you high school counsellors, I would sometimes wish I was still a high school counsellor, because the parents are paying for us to be able to do these kind of things, and sometimes a little awkward when you tell them they don't know what they're talking about. But a couple of ways that I would say maybe to help poke these parents to think slightly better on this kind of process. One I would obviously flag up is that you will get a recording to this webinar coming hopefully tomorrow. It can be downloaded, I think, from the platform, but it'll also be saved into our Facebook page, so you can find it on there. And so maybe someone else like me, in my British accent, telling the parents why focusing on the Ivies is not the thing to do might be helpful. When I give a talk to a group of parents, I tend to say that actually there is something else they need to think about here, which is that in order to be a parent, typically you have to be a generation out of date with what young people are doing. And in the same way, in the British context, we do not check our football scores on CFAX or teletext by typing 3 numbers into our phone. We do not send documents from one office to another using fax machines. We do not have all sorts of things that we took for granted, like massive brick phones in the 1980s. Do not run your child's university search like it is a world that has gone. Please learn about the world as it is now. And if all else fails, sit down with the parents and say to them, okay, you want the Ivy League for your child. Tell me which universities are in the Ivy League. And I will bet that maybe a Stanford, an MIT, a Georgetown, and NYU would appear on there. And in my experience, Cornell quite often does not. So definitely issues in there with parents, but as I said, it is a challenge and things are still going on there. Questions come in about what about the more creative industries? A very good question. Thank you for posting that one. For students who are looking at the creative industries, it will be very similar to what we talk about in the engineering situation, where it is something where you can find different ways of doing it. You might just go to, say, the university, which is an undergraduate college, be that a college on its own or college part of university, and major in that. So major in fine art, major in acting, major in music, in the same way as you have those other requirements. You can find colleges of fine arts, colleges of music, like perhaps Tisch at NYU, which is a College of Performing Arts, as part of a bigger university. So again, that model works there. Or indeed, you can find standalone creative arts programs. So for example, the Savannah College of Art and Design, a wonderful university. If you go to the universityguys.com/live, you can see we've just put up to date the fact that we will be doing a webinar with Savannah College of Art and Design in a couple of weeks' time. You can find music programs like at Juilliard. You can find all sorts of interesting creative programs like CalArts, which is founded by Walt Disney and has both performing arts and graphic arts programs as there as well. So again, it's going to come down to that personal fit that you'll be looking for there. Do you want to major in a program but not be fixed to it and be part of a bigger university? Do you want maybe the best of both worlds, where you have a standard college maybe offering a Bachelor of Fine Arts program, but it's also part of a bigger university with other undergraduate colleges as well? Or do you just want to go to somewhere and find your tribe that's just for undergraduate programs? And in the same way as there are the 3-2 programs of engineering, you can find some really interesting joint programs. We have a student right now who is in his, finishing out his first year at Brown and the Rhode Island School of Design's joint program where you have to be admitted to RISD, the Rhode Island School of Design. You also have to be admitted to Brown. So you've got to be pretty phenomenal for both of those, and then be one of the typically 12 students admitted into that program as well. So best of both worlds. And there are other kind of programs, one at Penn, one at Tufts, that are similar to those. Quick question, the new COVID-19 essay in the Common App, is it really optional or not? Well, it is really optional in the fact that you can submit your application without it. For those who don't know, to stop a lot of people writing their Common App essays this year on COVID-19, there's a new question coming that has been announced by Common App that's coming in. And it's not just about COVID, it's about some of the geographical issues like bushfires and things we've had in parts of the world, and huge sort of tragic storms and hurricanes and things, natural disasters. So students are being given a space to talk about something why their education has been significantly disrupted. Is it really optional or not? Will students be disadvantaged if they don't? If you're given an opportunity to write something to a university, it's another opportunity to say something. I wouldn't write it if you don't have something different to say. Don't force an admissions officer to read the same thing over again. That will just annoy them. But if you do think you have something that is going to add to your application and is going to give more context to who you are, then I would definitely have a look at that. In terms of, we've got a few other questions before we wrap up for the evening. What's a good number of universities to apply for? And I will use the college councillors get out calls for you as an application, saying it depends. Some students will be very successful in their early decision round, and they will make just the one US university application. They will apply early decision, they'll be admitted early decision, and they are done. We supported a student this year who applied for musical theatre, Musical theatre within a Bachelor of Fine Arts program is then within an acting program. Sometimes at some universities there are only 4 spots in musical theatre, and she had to apply to 30 different universities just because of how niche a program it is. So it really depends on what you're doing, and also depends on the workload. A student can apply to the University of California and with one real application be applying to all those campuses. The student is applying to Harvard and Penn and Cornell and Columbia. There's a lot of supplemental essays. If you apply to Northeastern, Miami, and Fordham, there are no supplemental essays, so a lot of stuff coming in there as well. Where to start? We're looking for the best university for you as soon as humanly possible. If you are lower 6 year 12 here now and you haven't done this, then get on with it. But if you are younger than that, then definitely start going now. Nice time is this kind of time in your GCSE year. Now, obviously, GCSEs have sort of gone by the wayside this year, so most of the year 11 students we're working with who are looking for the US are well into researching their college list now. Normally, we'd be saying finish your GCSEs, have some fun, relax, and maybe in August we'll start looking at that kind of process of coming up with your list. And look, you have the questions coming in here in terms of all sorts of other things about, how do I succeed? What do I need to do? What should I do? On the standard presentation that we give about applying to the US, which doesn't just focus on this issue of building a college list that tries to talk about everything in an hour, you might be able to work out how fast I have to speak to fit all that in. Then we would say the really important thing is to learn the rules of the game. The analogy I use in a lot of my talks is to compare football in the European context with football in the American context. If I walk down the street here in the market town of Market Harbour in Leicestershire where I live and ask someone to describe football, they would be talking about a game with 11 players on each side in a round ball. If I was in, say, Northwood, Minnesota, where I was a year ago today, they would be thinking about a very different sport and would be very confused if I turned up to play football without wearing pads and with a round ball. In the same way as if you're going to play American football, you need to learn the rules of American football. If you're going to apply to American universities, you need to learn the rules of American universities. Delve yourself into this process. You'll notice an awful lot of books on the shelves behind me as to how I have gone through this process. Take courses, watch webinars. You will find lots and lots of independent counsellors like us are trying to convince people to sign up for our services by giving these kind of webinars. Take advantage of those and learn as much as you can. Last question then before we wrap up tonight is a question that's come in. How important is it that the college counsellor has a personal relationship with a university representative? I would say it does depend in certain circumstances, and particularly the circumstances of you as a student. A university is never, never, never going to deny a student purely on the basis of the fact they have never heard of their counsellor, or indeed their accredited or affiliated independent counsellor, such as us. Sometimes we do appear on your application, sometimes we would be advocating for you, but they are never going to do that. It would be completely unethical and a very, very bad thing to do. But it can ease the process if there are glitches in your application, just in a very simple sense that if there is a personal relationship, it is probably more likely that someone's email might get answered a little bit more quickly. It's not going to change the admissions process, but it might reduce the stress. I'll use an example from this year that we had a student, if his early application was applying to Bryant University, a lovely university with a business and liberal arts program in Rhode Island. And as some students do from time to time, went through the common application, pivoted it into the payment platform, Flywire, put in his parents' credit card details, paid the application, closed the browser, I'm done. I missed the bit which said, return to the common application, and then you submit your application. He paid his application fee, but did not submit his application. Now, we do have a relationship with Peter Lundby at Bryant University. He knew that the student was going to be applying. He'd had communications with the family before. And going through the numbers a couple of days afterwards, he was a little confused not to see the student's application there and emailed saying, has the student changed his mind? And I went, no, he's applied, and get in touch, and it turns out he's only paid the fee, hasn't applied. Now, that was a genuine mistake. We had the relationship and we were able to advocate for the student that actually, it was an error. They had paid the fee. They had intended to apply. That decision was honoured. The student was admitted with this scholarship, and indeed that is where the student's going to go. So it's not important for admissions purposes at all. I definitely do not want you to have that impression to the questioner there, but it can help with those kind of issues as well. Having said that, if you are in those kind of situations and you can phone up the universities, you can contact them. Admissions counsellors are wonderful, lovely people. They will do their best to help as well. And I definitely wouldn't want anyone to think that it is essential that you have an incredibly highly trained college counsellor at your school, or indeed you pay money for someone like us. As I said at the start, we hope to make this more manageable. We hope to make it less stressful. And indeed, we like to put a bit of joy and fun into it as well. But it's certainly very possible to do all of this. Okay, that about wraps it up for tonight. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. If we can be of service to you in this process, we would very much like to do so, be that through joining us for future webinars. I've already mentioned the one coming up with SCAD, making use of all the free resources we put out on social media, and particularly I will flag the website universityguys.com and the Facebook page at the University Guys, with huge amounts of resources as well. But if you would like to book an initial consultation, if you do look at our fees and feel that we are people who might be able to assist with your process, it will be our great delight to have a conversation, explain what we do, and help you in order to understand how we might be able to find you that perfect college list in the United States, or indeed in many other countries around the world. I wish you well at this very difficult time, wherever you are in the world. I hope you enjoy the rest of your Saturday, and I look forward to some of you joining us for our next webinar coming very soon.